Welcome to Unlock CX, the podcast where we explore innovating customer engagement, brought to you by Anywhere 365. We'll be talking with industry experts about great strategies that create memorable customer experiences. And now, let's unlock this episode. Welcome to episode number 5 of Unlock CX. Fun fact, did you know that we're over 5,000 listeners in the first episodes? That's really amazing. I'd love to hear your feedback. So if you have any, share it with me in the channels where you listen to this or where you see this, and leave us a review. Would be great. I'm here with Kevin Keeler. Elisa is not here today because she's in Portugal, hopefully enjoying some time off. Kevin, welcome.
Well, it's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So you've been, you're here in the Netherlands. You're actually from Canada. You're here because you were a keynote speaker at our Global Partner Summit, Beyond 23. What do you think of it?
Well, first of all, I'm really enjoying Rotterdam. It seems like a great city. And, Beyond 23, it was a great opportunity to get together, with people from all over the world and had some great discussions. So I was honored to be a keynote speaker.
Cool. Right. Yeah. So for the people who don't know Kevin, Kevin is a tech analyst specifically in the unified communication area, business communication area, knows everything about the Microsoft ecosystem. So I'm sure that we'll cover a lot of that as well, but it's not about Microsoft, right? It's about CX. Now, I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you used to study maths.
Yes.
So I'm more like the creative guy. So what did your journey look like from maths to business communication, CX?
Yeah, no, that's a while ago, but I started in computer science, but what happened is while I was in university, I was also working and actually creating video games for the Commodore 64 and VIC-20, and the IBM PC had come out. So I think I had more computing power in my office, in my apartment at the time, which was my office, than the computer science department. So as part of that computer science program seemed boring. So then I'm like, okay, let's go into something. So I just went into pure math, right? So, but that deep technology and focus on numbers, when you look at, CX, customer experience, analytics is a big part of it. And I think that I often talk about how analytics should be used as a compass and a ruler. Maybe that early math background is what causes me to, appreciate the analytics more.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that we'll be talking about analytics in this conversation. So it's interesting for me. So you just said like your job used to be like years back,
right,
creating video games.
Correct.
Right. You told us yesterday in your keynote that as a kid you loved to do these drawings, like connecting the dots.
Right, the dot to dots, yes.
Yeah, and it's very applicable to CX, right?
Absolutely.
Because I think that there's like two key people who need to connect the dots in customer experiences. One, that's the worker.
Yep.
Right, so you have the front desk people, or preferably anyone in a company can be like an agent.
Right.
So you have the worker who needs to connect the dots for the customers. We also have the trend towards self-serve, right? And so that's where you as a customer need to connect the dots, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the two big chunks that I'd like to talk about. So my first question to you is like, what exactly are the dots that need to be connected in CX? What are the key ingredients for a great experience?
Yeah, I think so. You talked about kind of my start in video games, and I mentioned in the keynote, like it's really all about the business outcome. So when you create a video game, the business outcome is more of recreational. And then eventually I did, software that was educational. So then the outcome is learning. I think with customer experience, the dots that you're connecting, as you said, I mean, it's the agents and the knowledge workers in your organization. There's a lot of talk now about CCaaS plus UCaaS, but ultimately the big dots that need to be connected are the need or the desire of the prospective customer or the customer, and then the fulfillment of that in your organization. But to do that, I think you're going through all these intermediary dots, right? So, and that can be a digital experience, and where someone on the outside is trying to, whether they make a reservation or order something or change something. And then, of course, that connects into your organization, but then either to all of your automated systems, and then sometimes that doesn't meet the need. So then it becomes, the human systems as well. And I think that that's where organizations are still struggling. It's like they get a few of the connections. So the customer connects to a chatbot, but then maybe the chatbot's connections to your back-end systems or the right back-end people, that's where those dots aren't connected. And so ultimately, the customer has a less than ideal experience.
Yeah. Yeah, so what you're describing is like the siloed experience, right? So you either talk to a bot or to a human, but there's hardly any connection between those two dots.
Right.
So would you say that an ecosystem, like the idea of one ecosystem where it doesn't really matter if you're talking to like a bot or a human or like a machine, they all give you the same experience? Is that like, are we far away from that ideal state?
I would say we're farther away from the deployment of it. So I would say, technology is advancing rapidly, but for most organizations, even the technology that has existed a couple of years ago hasn't yet been deployed. Yeah. So I think it's amazing how often, chatbots fail in very easy ways to solve. And then, of course, increasingly, we've seen this explosion of, ChatGPT and generative AI, which means even, companies that are up to speed and providing pretty good, they've connected us pretty well. I think increasingly they're going to be able to, up their customer service game.
Yeah. So if you think of a company that does a great job connecting these dots for you as a customer, like in Canada, what's
Yeah, so I would say I have Nespresso, the coffee pods, and I enjoy that very much. That's my favorite appliance in my kitchen because it's
same here.
It's sleek and we use it every day, right? So, but they've done a good job, I would say, connecting the dots because ordering all those pods, because we go through a lot of them. Most of the time, the self-service piece works, and I think a lot of people
in their app, you mean?
Yeah, in their app. So. I think a lot of people would choose self-service because it's quick and easy, right? Yeah. But then occasionally, something will come up. My machine was leaking, or there's it flashes lights or whatever. And, then they've got, for me at least, it's been a very good, chatbot experience.
Yeah.
And then a couple of times, I've needed to escalate from that, and then it's moved to a voice call, and that has been seamless, and they've seemed to know who I am, and
that's great.
Yeah, so they for me at least, it's been a very good experience, and that as most of the people probably listening know, that's not the experience with a lot of organizations, unfortunately.
No, absolutely, yeah. So that's a great idea actually, to just bring, if someone from Nespresso is listening, I'd love to welcome you on this show because I agree, it's a great experience, right?
Right,
and even. So I had this a couple of times as well. Like it doesn't really matter, like sometimes things just don't work and then you need to reach out, right? Yeah. So, I mean, the product itself is a great part of the customer experience. But when you find that something doesn't work as you expected, like the last thing that you want is, like you're talking to a chatbot, it says like, yeah, sorry, I can't help you. You need to reach out to someone. And then you need to cover the whole context again.
Right, exactly.
it's a waste of time.
It is.
And Nespresso does a good job there. Yeah. So if you look at, you were talking about analytics, right?
Right.
So if you look at like how do you measure if something is successful, or like how do you measure success? Yesterday I heard you say that you need to look beyond the typical average handle time or number of dialogues per person.
Right.
And you need to focus on business outcomes. What are the typical business outcomes that you see as like the leading metric that that organization should use?
Yeah, so I a lot of times with more complicated technology implementations, I'll start with senior people at our organization doing like a vision session.
Yeah.
And, one of the things is really to define what success is, which sounds like easy, but it's actually harder because, ultimately the business outcomes are, for organizations, you need to, drive revenue or reduce costs. But people, there's a lot of proxies for that. So I think what happens is people start by saying things like, we would like to improve productivity, which sounds good until you start saying, okay,
what does it mean?
Well, yeah. How productive are you now? Are you 62%, 87%? They're like, well, wait a second. We don't actually measure that. So it's like, okay, but if productivity is the success metric, and we're not measuring it, like then how a year from now are we going to know that the project's successful?
Right.
So, okay, then they say, oh yeah, okay, it's not really productivity. And, and then they'll try to move to things that they do measure, like number, like average calls, or waiting time, but then you really need to ask and say, well, why is that important?
What's the correlation?
Right. Because it's like, obviously you can have very short, calls if the agents hang up on people, or you can have very long calls if they just keep you on the phone chatting, but they're not actually addressing your needs. So, I think the thing is ultimately it does need to tie back to, either optimizing costs or driving revenue. And I think, all of these things that get measured in the typical contact center, they do, but I think you have to, it's like be careful what you measure, like in quality control, because you can drive one analytic very positively, but if you haven't said, well, we're trying to do this because then when we measure, NPS scores or we survey customers, we want their, the customer satisfaction to be higher. But even that, you assume customer satisfaction being higher, you expect that that's going to drive additional revenue.
Yeah. Right.
Well, see, that's like loyalty. And then you connect the dot to say revenue, because if you had great customer satisfaction, all your customers were super loyal, but your sales were going down, you would say, well, wait a second, we've got loyal customers that are buying less. That would be a problem, right? So, so I do think up front, especially at the senior level, there really needs to be clarity. We're going to make this investment in this technology. We're going to make this, investment in our people. How are we going to know it's successful a year from now?
Yeah, right. So you also touched upon a couple of data points. So one of the things that I remember you said, like customers who experience a great service or whatever are willing to pay 5% more, I think.
Yeah, that was right. I think it was a study from Forbes went and collected all these different customer service, customer CX analytics. Yes.
Yeah, and you could argue like that's hardly significant. So the 5%, okay, but on the other side, like, so I know that especially a lot of business leaders have like a negativity bias, where like, so you also touched on like if the experience is not on par,
right?
I'm not sure what the percentage was, but like a super large percentage of your customers will leave your brand because of that experience.
Right. I think the one study said 60% of people, right? But there's a lot of different, studies and, and ultimately, that's connected to, that's the example of customer service being connected to loyalty, being connected to increasing or decreasing revenue.
Right. Yeah. So if we focus on the workers in a company, right? What are the key ingredients that they need to deliver that customer to ultimately deliver on these business outcomes? What are like the top 3 or 4 ingredients that they need? We've been talking about technology,
right?
But
yeah, well, I think there's a lot of studies that show that engagement, and positive engagement of the agents, whether those agents, and I want to use a broad definition of that because those could be the people that you traditionally think of being contact center agents, but it also could be knowledge workers that are brought in to solve
salespeople or
more difficult things. So certainly, I think the technology plays a role in terms of having access, and instant or quick access to appropriate information. But certainly the, engagement in terms of just the broader kind of cultural, organizational effectiveness is going to be another, key ingredient. And I think that those two broadly, I mean, you can drill down into each of those, but I think, it is both the technology and kind of the people, and then of course the kind of the processes that connect those two.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I was thinking, I never really occurred to me. So as a technology vendor, right? So we tend to talk a lot about technology, and then I figured like culture is, well, I'd say probably equally important, right? If you feel that you are the owner of this problem that your customer has,
right,
and you feel an urge to really help them out, like you can have all the technology on this earth, but if that's not like your passion to really help them, or you're not empowered, you don't like, you also talked about adoption, right? Like trainings, people don't feel, I have all this technology to my availability, but I don't feel that I have sufficient training to make use of all of that, right?
Right.
And that's, do you think that part, that human part, that like the people part of is that more important? Is it equally important, less important than technology?
Well, I think, this is the thing with like the kind of the theme of connecting the dots, which is, I mean, so you got this complicated connect the dots. I showed a few at the keynote that are very complicated. And, the truth is, unless all the dots are connected, you don't see what the pattern is. So I would say, when you ask, is something more important or less important, I'm going to say like all the pieces are important, and it's the fact that they're working together. So, you hit on training, and I think that is a big gap. So I mentioned some statistics during the keynote from a BC Strategy study that I co-authored with Blair Pleasant on training and adoption. And the sad state of affairs is, when you ask people, more than 60% of people say that they don't understand all the features of the technology tools that they have. They didn't receive adequate initial training. They don't receive adequate, ongoing training. And yet from a technology perspective, if I look at, put on my technology hat, we're all excited that we're rolling out hundreds and sometimes thousands of new features, but at the same time, the users didn't even understand the features that they had. So return on investment of any technology, you absolutely need to provide better training.
Right.
And you measure that training by the fact that the features are adopted, right? So, if people aren't using the feature, there's really two things. Either you picked the wrong technology and you gave somebody a tool that, wasn't suited for what they were trying to do, or the tool could have been perfect, but, you didn't teach them how to use it. And therefore they're not adopting it. Right. Yeah. So that's where, I think, measuring adoption is critical to driving the return on investment for any of these wonderful technology projects.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember. So one sentence stood out for me from your keynote was, if we give features to our people and they're not using it, is it even a feature?
Right.
It's,
it reminded me, I think I used the analogy, if, when a tree falls in the woods, no one's there, doesn't make a sound.
Yeah.
Like that. The modern day thought experiment was, so, there's all these features, no one knows about them. is it really a feature? And I think maybe from a marketing perspective, but not from an actual usability or actual value perspective.
No. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. So it's not just making sure that your people do the right things, but also enabling them to do these things right.
That's right. And circling back to the analytics is not measuring things that cause them to do the wrong thing. Like you talked about, creating a culture where people, feel invested in helping a customer solve a particular problem. And that works well, except if you actually, mandate that they need to close, 100 cases a day. What people have a tendency to do is they just close the case. They don't, because you've actually created a situation that's working against, what you are trying to do. So I think that's back to be careful what you measure.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So just briefly touching on Teams and
yep.
Sorry, like if you're not on Teams, that's okay. Skip this part or don't. But because I didn't even know this, but you talked about like how Teams and also like ISV software solutions on top of Teams give you a lot of tools to measure. There's a lot of reports out there that you can use, and I'm not even sure if even like typical Teams customers know about all these reports. I mean, talking about measuring productivity, you said like we don't measure it, but you actually could, right?
Well, you can. Like I would say it's difficult because you'd have to define productivity, but certainly Microsoft does a good job with the entire Office suite of putting in place a lot of instrumentation. So this is behavioral analytics. So this is just, there's two different kinds. There's sentiment analysis, which is what people tell you, how they feel, what they think they do. And then there's the behavioral analytics, which is, what they're actually doing. Yeah. And to get a complete picture, you kind of need both. But Microsoft does a great job on the behavioral analytics of measuring what you're doing inside of, Teams. So yes, so users can access, for example, you create teams and you create channels, and most organizations have hundreds or thousands of those. So you can go in as a team owner and look at, okay, is this team being used? Like, who's replying? Who's participating? Yeah. So you can access that, which is an interesting thing kind of on usage and adoption. And then, of course, there's reports in the admin center and the Teams admin center. There's a call quality dashboard. There's a whole set of Power BI reports. So there is a tremendous amount of reporting, and Microsoft keeps adding reports. And you have to keep going and looking because they don't necessarily tell you about it. So there is a tremendous amount of behavioral analytics available. I'm surprised at the number of organizations that don't even look at those because they don't tell you all the answers. And sometimes they cause you to ask more questions, but those are good questions to be asked. Yeah. But, you certainly, there's a lot of tools there. They come for free out of the box. And I'm surprised that people don't even bother, and it really is the IT pros that have to do that, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I know that a lot of companies, I mean, ourselves included, I guess, is like a lot of companies say like we're data driven, right, and like we abide with like factual data, and then we learn from that, and then we go. But it's actually hard to really get that data in place and to make sense out of all these reports.
Yes. Yeah, no, you need to look at them. So that's the first part. But then, yes, it is hard to be data driven because a lot of times the data then causes you to ask more questions. Yeah. But I do think like if you're data driven, if you're in a growth mindset, those are good questions that you're asking because it means you're drilling down and better understanding what's working and, maybe what's not working as well as you'd like it to.
Yeah. Curiosity is maybe then the
definitely.
Key theme.
Being curious about, So, curious, look at the reports, then you're like, why is this? And then you have to go figure out how something's working or not working. Yeah. So you're right. Curiosity is important.
Awesome. The second part that I wanted to touch on is, so we've talked about how people in the company can connect dots. Right. The second part is customers, self-serve. Like we all know that there's this big trend of digital CX, self-serve. Like I think that you said like 70% of customers prefer self-serve.
That was, once again, there was like, different numbers from different studies, but it's a high level. Like customers, ultimately customers want what they want and they want it now.
Yeah.
So self-serve is
guilty, by the way.
No. As am I. So, but self-serve is typically the easiest way, right? Because if you can go in an app and click a few times and get what you want, that's typically faster than calling somebody and explaining who you are and authenticating, over voice and all that kind of thing. So,
right.
So self-serve, high percentage of people, that would be their initial and, channel that they would choose.
Right. Yeah. So the funny thing is, so everyone's talking about AI right now, right? So, you were at Enterprise Connect, all the presentations was all about AI. But you said AI doesn't matter.
Right.
Can you expand on that?
Sure. Yeah. So, this is back to business outcomes, right? Because it's not AI doesn't matter. What matters is, AI provides an opportunity to more quickly get you to the desired business outcomes.
Yeah.
Whether that's, the chatbot, if it's now smarter to understand natural language and just, as opposed to just giving me 5 choices, it just like is just tell me what you need. And if it actually understands what I need, and then it can, translate that into, interacting with the backend systems in the appropriate way.
Right.
So, smart programming or artificial intelligence, it doesn't matter how we get there. It's about, fulfilling, in the case of, what we're talking about, the context, the customer's desire and wants as quickly as possible, right?
Right, yeah. Yeah, I was actually very happy that you said that AI doesn't matter, because that's like really resonates with me and like the way we at Anywhere 365 also think about AI. Just the same way with the contact center, right? It's not about a contact center, it's about the dialogue. Like your customer calls you or they go to your app because they have a job to be done. And then you take it from there, and then so it's interesting to see, like, even though I get that, like the whole the trend towards AI because it helps us to do things faster, whatever. But in the end, it's all about the value that you bring to your customers, right? And it's that value. If we really are moving towards the digital experience economy, that experience should be exactly the same for an AI-driven dialogue,
right,
as a human-driven dialogue. I'll be honest, I haven't seen a lot of scenarios where that really, like, AI really did the thing for me.
Right. No. And I think many years ago there was this was back in the printed book days. There was like a multi-volume set of books that was around artificial intelligence. And it was a series of essays. And one of the gentlemen argued that as opposed to calling something intelligent, you should just call it some random name and prove that it's intelligent. Because I think, everybody's adding artificial intelligence to their product, assuming that it's making things better and getting you there faster. But as you said, that hasn't necessarily been the experience. So, now if we have product X with AI added, that we assume that that's going to get the job done faster, but, it isn't always the case. No. And in some ways, because of bias and the data sets they use in AI and all of these complicated things that people are just starting to understand, sometimes it can get you to the wrong answer fast. So there was lawyers who have used AI to write legal briefs and they got the legal brief done quickly, but it had a lot of made up information. Yeah.
Based on laws from 2020.
Or even just, I mentioned in the keynote how, hallucination. So large language models can hallucinate, which is really just, it seems like a marketing word. That just means it gets it wrong, but it sounds a lot better, right? They hallucinate. But this lawyer wasn't happy. So the AI created a legal brief that referenced precedents that didn't even exist. And so the judge was not impressed. So he got his work done faster, but he got reprimanded by the judge in this particular case. And in the end, AI didn't actually help him at all.
Oh, it's so funny because I last year I thought I heard a song and I thought it was a song by Nielsen. He's a Dutch singer. So I asked ChatGPT, can you give me the text of that song by Nielsen? And it provided me with the text, and I was like, okay, that's cool. And I looked it up and I couldn't find it anywhere. And it turned out that whole song wasn't written by the guy. I don't even think that he's ever put it on stage or whatever. So ChatGPT just made up that this was a song created by this guy or sang by this guy. And it completely was just a lot of crap. I mean, I liked the text. I was like, I'll just send this to him and I'll ask him to pay me for it. But
right. So I think that, we're all learning about the positives and negatives of AI. And, I think there's opportunities in the CX space, but, to kind of circle back, it needs to be connected to business outcomes that, matter to us and our organizations.
Awesome. Right. I agree. Thank you so much for your time, Kevin. One last question that I have for you. So I like to end our podcast with always the same question.
Okay.
We're always on the lookout for new guests, right? And I don't know, I know a lot of people, but I don't know everyone. So you as an expert, who would you suggest that we definitely need to bring on the show?
Okay, so that's a great question. So I am going to say, I'm going to pick a colleague and a friend, Thomas Brannan. And the reason that I'm going to pick him is he focuses on, contact center, but also he has deep, interest and focus as an analyst in the AR and VR, augmented reality and virtual reality. And I think it would be fascinating to talk to him about how those things are connected now and might be connected in the future, because I would like to hear what he has to say.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sounds like a plan. All right, Thomas, we're coming for you. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. That's a wrap for this episode of Unlock CX, brought to you by Anywhere 365. Did you enjoy it? Leave us a review and share your comments. Oh, and be sure to subscribe as we continue to explore customer engagement strategies that unlock memorable experiences.